If you watched my last video, you saw I built a killer router table, and on this episode, we're going to use it to build a nice set of shaker doors for this built-in. Let's get into it. To get this process started, I took some measurements of the existing built-in because I'm actually going to build a face frame that fits the existing shelving unit that will hold a set of inset doors. This will be my first time making a set of inset doors like this, so it should be interesting. While taking a few measurements, I decided to remove the existing molding as it wasn't going to be needed with the design I had in mind. Next up, we moved over to the computer with the measurements to do a quick 3D model to sort out all the dimensions. I had filmed this entire process and I was going to share everything with you, but instead of making this video 45 minutes long, I decided I'm going to make a simple video at another time to show some of the basics. I keep saying I'm going to share a video like this on here, but I keep second guessing how I want to do it, so stay tuned for that one. Anyway, after finishing up the design, it was time to start cutting up the material to get this face frame and doors going. For the face frame and door frames, I used 3/4 inch poplar with a 1/4 inch MDF for the shaker panels. I think I mentioned this in my last video, but I don't have the ability to mill my own lumber, so I have to stick with the store-bought stuff. And a lot of times, these pre-finished boards, even after sifting through the rack, aren't the straightest. So what I found to work best is to cut up the boards close to the final length, which makes them easier to get a straight rip cut on the table saw. To do this, I take the side that's bowed towards the ends and run it through the table saw against the straight edge like a level. I then flip the board and rip it to its final length using the actual table saw fence. Following that, I then cut it to its final length. Obviously a joiner and a planer would probably yield better results, but I work with what I got. For this job, I decided to build the face frame separate from the existing built-in, as I wanted to get the best possible chance of making it square. So once all the pieces were cut to final length, I assembled them per my design using glue and pocket screws. With that all assembled, I moved to mounting it to the existing built-in with a few finished nails, being careful to make sure everything was equally spaced. Next, I moved to building the doors, and for these I did the same process to get good straight pieces before moving over to the router table to cut the tongue and grooves. This is where I started to have some problems. The router bit I bought to do this was actually an adjustable set, which from what I read had great reviews. I started by dialing in the groove cut to match my 1/4 inch MDF panel and then moved to the tongue cutting bit. And for some reason, this bit was badly bent, and thankfully I noticed it before I started cutting all my rails. So I ended up having to pivot to using a regular dado bit and adjusted the height and the fence on the router table accordingly. Although this took a little bit of time to dial in, the results were awesome. I can't wait to continue using this router table to level up my projects. I also want to say, if you sent me an email about the plans, I've been trying to get back to everybody. The next set of plans I give out for free, I'm definitely going to upload them to a Google Drive because it was hard to keep track of all the requests I got via email. So now that all the stiles and rails were cut, I moved to cutting the MDF panels, and with that, we're ready to do a quick sand of the edges and assemble. I like to dry assemble these first and make sure everything fits nicely before making a mess with all the glue. With the dry fit done, I added some glue to the tongue and clamped these together, always being sure to check that they're square. After letting the glue dry, I did a quick sanding to get any rough or uneven patches off before moving back to the router table to add a little detail to these doors. I decided to cut an 1/8 inch rabbet around the face of all the doors, which I was definitely a little bit nervous about, but I think it made a big difference in the way that these doors looked in the end. With the doors fully assembled, I then moved over to mounting the inset door hinges. I'll leave these in a link in the description below, but these are a set from Bloom that mount to the back of the face frame, which is exactly what I needed for this application. Before moving into the painting, I decided to mount the doors, and this is where I realized there was a problem. So, unfortunately, I overcompensated when I took off the reveal gap for the doors. Now the gap around the actual doors in the face frame is just a little bit too big. It's supposed to be closer to like 3/32 of an inch, and it's actually a little bit bigger than an eighth. And although they fit really nice and square, I really don't like the way that they look. And the only way that I can think of that I can fix these without completely redoing all the doors is to make up that distance with this center section of the face frame. I'm actually going to add roughly 1/4 of an inch to this center section, and then that'll allow me to move all the doors over and thus shrinking the gaps on the outside. The tops and the bottoms are actually smaller than 1/8 of an inch, which is very nice, but the vertical portions of the gap or the reveal are not very nice. So to fix that, I'm gonna have to get this piece out, which kind of stinks because it's pocket hole screwed into the horizontal piece, but I'll cut it out, I guess, and fit a new piece in there, and we'll figure it out from there. Luckily, the multi-tool worked to cut out that center piece of face frame, so I could replace it with a wider section, and with that all done, the doors fit perfectly. To get the finish process going, I sanded the inner section of the built-in and scuffed up that old polyurethane, and then painted this section with some bin cover stain primer. While that dried, I decided to add another piece of trim around the outside edge because I thought it looked a little too plain in my original design, and I think I made the right choice. With that done, I could move over to getting the next coat of primer on, and this is where I made another mistake that cost me a lot of time. I decided I wanted to try spraying this with an HVLP gun, so that meant masking everything off and building an enclosure so the overspray wouldn't get all over everything. I used these zip wall poles and some plastic tarps, which definitely made it pretty easy to build the enclosure, but even that was a little time consuming, as this was the first time I've done something like this. So like I said, I decided to spray all this stuff with an HVLP gun. I had an existing gun, which I used to paint Rum and Colt, but for these thicker types of paint, I needed to get a different gun with a 2.0 size needle so that the paint would flow correctly. Even with this gun, I decided to thin the paint and primer by 10%. For the primer, I used Styx primer, which is a high bond primer, and being that this is a water-based coating, I could thin it with a bit of water before filling the gun and spraying. So this gun is considered to be a gravity feed gun, so it really only works when the paint hopper is on top, which works for painting flat surfaces, but when I turn the gun upside down to spray the inside of the built-in, it would starve for paint. I really need to get a pressurized cup to make this setup work better, so I'll have to give that a try next time. At the same time, I set up a similar enclosure in the garage to prime and paint the doors, and this is where I made the biggest mistake on this project, and it was pretty stupid on my part. I decided to add 2 screws and use a piece of fishing line to hold the doors while I primed and painted them. And lo and behold, one of those pieces of fishing line decided to snap, and the door hit the floor and ended up breaking. Thankfully it was fixable, and I switched to using hooks and clothes hangers to hang the doors for the rest of the painting. That was a lesson learned. Now for the paint, I use Benjamin Moore Advanced, which is meant to be rolled on or brushed on rather than sprayed, as it's very thick and slow drying, so it allows it to flatten out to give a really nice finish. But being that I already had the gun, I decided I wanted to give it a shot and spray it. And again, This wasn't a very good move, and I ended up switching to rolling and brushing after the first coat because for some reason the gun continued to clog up. It was probably user error, and I look forward to trying this again, but maybe on something a little more simple with a little less time put into it already. After letting the paint dry, I remounted the doors and got to mounting the handles after some careful alignment and leveling. And just like that, another project is done. That's a wrap for this project. It's the first set of inset doors that I built on the channel, and I'm really happy with the way that they turned out. I definitely learned a lot during the way with trying to spray this type of paint and primer, and I look forward to continue to learn on how to do that a little bit better on the next projects that I do. If there's anything you think I can improve on, please leave a comment down below. As always, please remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.